everyone, Starbuck here. Wanted to take some time today to go over the lenses that I use, why I have the ones that I have, and kind of give everyone an understanding of what those look like in different contexts. So the first thing I'm going to do is start with the camera. So it's a Nikon D7500 digital SLR full body camera, full sensor size. What that means is that I have to use certain lenses to mount into my camera, or I have to use adapters in order for those lenses to work. The issue with a Nikon or any type of body is that the distance between the flange where the lens goes in and the sensor itself can change depending upon what the company is, what it was made for, where the sensor depth was, a variety of different things, right? So in reality, what we need to do is make sure the lenses that we have match the camera body, not just an adapter, but also in our focus. Why does that matter? Well, in astrophotography, we need to reach something referred to as infinity focus. Now, infinity focus is reaching a focal point on the sensor for something as distant as the stars or celestial bodies, right? So if you can't reach that infinity distance, and we'll have one that we go over here in a moment, then you're going to run into some problems. All right, so let's dive into this astrophotography lens comparison. What I've done is taken a bunch of different lenses here, and we're going to go over each one of these and kind of what you can expect from the different types of outcomes from those lenses. So as I'm scrolling through these here on the iPad, you can start to see that there are certain images that seem to jump more than others, and I'll talk about why that's the case. So for the first one is a Sigma 70-300 telephoto lens. This is what you would normally get. It's a nice lens, but it's what you would normally get in a box when you order your camera, or if you get the version that comes with a couple of extra lenses, right? And people want telephoto because you've got such different focal length options. So I can start at 70 millimeters, which gives me a pretty good wide view. But I can take that into 300 millimeter, focus on something very specific in front of me, and get those details as well. Now, because it is flexible, as most technology, this is the case, if something tends to be really flexible for a lot of situations, it tends not to do a lot of things really well, right? So it's not a focused, specialized device. And as you'll see in some of these images here, I'm not going to go over the exposure times. Just keep in mind these are all relatively about the same. So going to be somewhere between the 20 and 30 second range, usually about 25-second exposure. There's going to be more stacked on some than others, but what I tried to do is keep the spirit of each of these lenses so you have a sense of kind of what you're working with. Now, as a quick aside, why do I do this with the older lenses? Well, one, I'm not made of money. I'm a graduate student working on my PhD, which means I'm officially like white poor. What that means is that if I want to take pictures of the moon, I want to take pictures of stars or celestial bodies, I have to get a little more creative with what I have. So I have a little bit older of a digital SLR, but I think it's going to be really accessible to most people, or to get something within that range. And simultaneously, I'm also teaching my eldest daughter how to do this on a slightly less capable digital SLR full body, so a D90. So we're doing this with D7500s as well as D90s. These are all taken with the D7500. So you can see kind of the modern lens. It does capture photos. You'll have some feedback from your friends that are fantastic. You'll love it. That's great. When you start getting into what's called a prime lens, this is where you can't change the objective length of the lens, so it's fixed. We have 200 millimeter focal length. This is one of my favorites. This is a Vivitar 200. It's a much older 1970s lens. It's all manual, as most of these are in Astro. I don't use autofocusers. I do everything by hand. You'll notice that you get a lot of color variation. You can get pops depending on the amount of exposure time that you have. But one other consideration with lenses is how you're framing your subject. So in this case, if you'll notice at this kind of 200 range, we can kind of compare that to what was about 150. I think it was about 150 millimeters for the Sigma when I took this. You'll notice that the nebula is there, and you get a lot of surrounding stars, but you don't get very much content outside of that, right? You can't really zoom in and see the detail of the nebula. And that's why we're going to get these more dedicated, longer focal length prime lenses. And when you get into the astrographs, which are the dedicated lenses for astrophotography, you'll see that they get exponentially more expensive, but also the capability gets better and better. From bokeh effect to where we have stars that need to be recomposed in post-processing and the like. So do keep in mind that there is post-processing on here. It is light serial work, so we're really doing some background extraction. I'm not using darks. I'm using straight lights on these so that you get a sense of what's possible. Now, if we look at a Takumar, which is a very well-desired vintage lens, this is where we get into the focal distance, or the focus distance between the lens and the sensor itself can kind of get out of whack. So in this case, the Takumar was not designed for a Nikon. So I went and shaved some spacers, pulled some out, tried to get the lens more compact so that it would fit on the distance to my Nikon digital SLR. I was not successful. I could not reach infinity focus, but I did not want to lose this beautiful piece of glass that takes fantastic photos. So I took a risk, popped a 2x telephoto magnifier on it, which really just rebuilds where that focus point is on the lens, takes it and refactors it into the sensor, and so now I can get infinity focus. The difference is that this is an effective 400 millimeter, right? It's not the 200, or it's right, I think, right in that, right within that range, right? So you're right in 300 to 400 millimeter. The downside is everything on my lens is subject to this telephoto and how clean and clear it is. So even though I have the best lens ever, if I pop that on there, I'm really going to potentially shoot myself in the foot. But you can see kind of the difference between using the prime versus using it with the telephoto. You get a little bit more detail, but there are some other things that don't stand as well for us. Now, we get into some of my favorites. These are the last three. The first one here being a Samyang 500 millimeter mirrored lens. I love this lens. Why do I like mirrored lenses? Well, I can make them half the length of a normal lens. So if you've seen people out at football fields that have giant prime lenses, that's fantastic. That's not great if I want to go for a hike to a deep sky area. What I have to do is find a way to compact that size. And there's a couple of ways to do it. And one of them that's one of my favorites and one of the least touch is using a mirrored lens. And so this, I'll throw up a diagram here so you can see how it functions. Essentially, it takes the light in, bounces it off a back mirror, bounces it off a front mirror, and then sends it back to where the camera body is in the sensor. This allows the focal length to be a lot longer, but in a much more compact body. And what you'll see in the detail on this is just astounding, right? So this is all going to be the Orion Nebula. It's all about the same exposure time. It's an f8 lens, so this is where we're talking about kind of the proportion between the diameter and the length. And getting that number down as much as we can allows more light to be captured, although it can get a little tricky, particularly when you get down to the f2 range. Now the Celestron, this is where we get a little bit more grainy, 750 millimeter. This is a much slower light gathering lens, and it's also much more magnified. So when I'm thinking about long exposures with my Star Adventure tracker system, I have to stay on that star much longer. So unless I have a guide scope to help with adjustments, I am going to find streaking over time, particularly for the length of time that I need to gather for a faint nebula. So one thing to keep in mind is that moving from that 500 into the 750 is quite a jump. I tend to like being within this kind of 400, 500 millimeter range. That seems to be where my sweet spot is, but you're going to have to find yours as well. And then finally, this is a really fun one. This is an Orion 1000 millimeter lens. You get some really great color out of it. You get a lot of detail, but it is really easy to blow this out because you really want to gather as much light as possible. It's a slow gathering lens as it is. So oftentimes you'll turn that ISO up, you'll turn your exposure times up, and before you know it, you've blown it out. So it's really important to keep in mind the balance between the amount of light that you're letting in, that exposure length, as well as the type of lens that you're using and the time of year. So each of these were all shot in the wintertime. None of them were shot in the warmer period, so some do have dew heaters, some don't. So just keep in mind, like, it's not going to be scientifically exact in this comparison, but I think it gives you an idea as far as framing what the different focal lengths look like in comparison to the same object, as well as kind of the different focal lengths and how that frames the body. As always, wishing you fair winds and clear skies. Starbuck out.